Anyone who has spent time around punk rock music definitely knows who Glenn Danzig is. Initially revolutionizing the punk rock genre with the legendary Misfits, and eventually embracing a darker and more melancholic tone with Samhain and his eponymous band, Glenn Danzig is known as one of the most important and influential musicians in punk rock history. Songs such as Skulls, Last Caress, and Hybrid Moments are immortalized through some of the catchiest choruses in human history, and other songs such as Deth Comes Ripping and Earth AD help popularize hardcore music. However, many consider the Misfits and a majority of hits from Danzig's early solo career, such as Twist of Cain and Mother, to really be the only songs worth paying attention to in his discography, as many consider the majority of activity after the dissolvement of the classic Danzig lineup to be forgettable. And as someone who is a big fan of the vast majority of the entire Danzig catalog, I do kind of understand where this sentiment comes from. After Danzig 4, the classic lineup of Glenn Danzig, Chuck Biscuits, Eerie Von, and John Christ dissolved, with everyone not named Glenn Danzig making their exit from the band for various reasons. With a brand new lineup and new styles of music becoming popular, Glenn Danzig would look to experiment with industrial and techno, which turned off many of the fans gathered throughout their peak of MTV popularity, resulting in Danzig 5 and the subsequent releases only garnering attention from Danzig's cult following. Despite slowly scaling back the industrial and techno effects as more and more as releases went on, very few hold those albums up to the same standard as Lucifuge or How the Gods Kill, and nowhere near the Danzig Misfits catalog. And even though I myself am a fan of the majority of these releases, I do think it can be tough to find songs that stand next to Tired of Being Alive or Bringer of Death. However, I feel that there is one post-Def American record that I think is just as good as those early 90s albums, and I am tempted to say it may be my favorite thing that Danzig has ever done. I feel like that if it was recorded back in the 90s and released as Danzig 5, people would remember it as his best work. After the release of Danzig 4, many people considered Danzig to be living on borrowed time, and questioned if the music would ever be a return to form. However, Glenn would eventually silence those doubts as he released the gritty and bluesy Death Red Sabaoth. Death Red Sabaoth was released in the summer of 2010 as what many speculated to be Glenn Danzig's final release. It wasn't, but it was speculated. However, Glenn proves he still has plenty left in the tank as the album opens with the electric and thunderous Hammer of the Gods, which lyrically touches upon themes of Vikings and Ragnarok. Unlike previous releases that's open with a atmospheric track and transition into more of a slow and moody, dark song, Hammer of the Gods is fast and powerful. And the following track, The Revengeful, continues as Glenn howls one of the catchiest choruses of the album, accompanied by a nice bouncy rhythm and pitch harmonics. And I think opening an album this way was a great call. I do enjoy songs like Black Mass and Skin Carver. However, Hammer of the Gods just has an energy that hasn't been seen on a Danzig album since Lucifuge or How the Gods Kill. And while Skin Carver is a great way for Glenn to open a show, nothing compares to Hammer of the Gods. Black Candy and On a Wicked Night I think are the best example of what I feel makes a lot of Glenn Danzig's later releases so enjoyable. I don't think very many of Glenn Danzig's fans will argue that his work is some avant-garde, technically brilliant piece of music, and I don't think that's how Danzig ever intended to sell it. What makes Glenn Danzig's music so good is the atmosphere or the mood or emotion that it intends to capture. And I think these songs, among the others, accomplish that perfectly. Black Candy is a dark, moody, yet erotic track that seems to be about addiction. Seemingly heroin based on the title, but I always envision the addiction to be to dark metal music and the aesthetic that turns a lot of normal people away from it. Tommy Victor's pinch harmonics captures a feel of intrinsic pleasure that I feel aligns very well with the addiction-based lyrics. On a Wicked Night also captures the feeling of pleasurable brood that allows Glenn a moment to sing along to acoustic guitar before erupting into a bluesy rocker. It isn't necessarily anything fancy, but I don't think it really needs to be. Death Red Moon, which for all intents and purposes can be considered the album's title track, not only exhibits Glenn's signature howl and once again decimates any question of how his age would affect the product, but I think it captures the desired feel of the album. Leading up to Death Red Sabaoth, Glenn emphasized how the band would be recording with 70s equipment in order to create a more organic and thicker sounding album. There definitely is a very good amount of reverb abuse on this album, but I think it actually works in the album's favor, giving it that howl on an open field emotion. Some critics will look at production for just about anything and expect it to always be state of the art or at the top of the line. However, I'm of the opinion that sometimes the shittier the production, the better the result can be, and I think that's the case here. Apart from On a Wicked Night and the closing track, which we'll get to, the only time on the album where there's a pause from the intensity is the incantation of Pyre of Souls, which isn't anything drastic, it's just Glenn chanting behind an acoustic line and some piano and bells, but I think this track exhibits the feel of Joe Chiodo's artwork. I am a stickler for cool album art, and one of my guilty pleasures is when I feel that the music on an album captures the emotion behind the art, and I think this track helps that. It has a very dark, evil night feel, and I think the piano and bells gives it a bit of a Southwest desert black magic mood. I probably digress here, but the Southwest desperado California kid in me had to mention it. The last track I will talk about is the closer, Left Hand Rise Above, which lyrically is about the left-hand path and embracing the power of one's inner self. This is my favorite closer on any Danzig album, apart from maybe Archangel on Initium. I like it more than Let It Be Captured, I like it more than Evil Thing or Black Angel, White Angel. This is probably my favorite closer he ever did. The instrumentals with a softer spoken Glenn monologuing before Tommy shreds into the pre-chorus just has that dirty, whimsical feel that had been missing on previous releases. Where the prior closers focus on darkness in a more evil and depressing manner, this one sees it as a place for hope and strength and beauty to grow out of. And as Disney as that may sound, I think it was a very good perspective for Glenn to close this album with. Looking at this album as a whole, I want to close off this retrospective talking about the one thing that makes every Danzig album what it is. It is the make or break tool for it, and that is Glenn Danzig's voice. I don't think I need to talk about the Def American era. Everyone with ears knows how powerful Glenn's voice is and that it was the main selling point. But going back to Danzig 5, a lot of people feel that Glenn butchered it by hiding it beneath the industrial effect. And while I like a good number of those industrial songs, I just can't help but imagine what See All You Were or Hints of Her Blood would have sounded like without the industrial effect. Side note, Glenn, if you're actually watching this for some reason and you have access to those original mixings without the industrial effects, please release them. A lot of fans would pay a lot of money for that, including myself. Thank you very much. Have a good day. As Glenn would slowly unravel the industrial effects on following releases, it's evident that age had began catching up and had affected his voice. Satan's Child, I Luciferi, and Circle of Snakes all sounded like Glenn was a bit withered and adjusted his songwriting for it. At times, his voice worked very well, like on tracks such as The Coldest Sun and Skull Forest, but on others, it can get drowned out behind the instrumentals. I think Death Red Sabaoth shows Glenn being a little bit more liberal with his voice and puts it back at the forefront of the music as opposed to it just being another instrument alongside the others. And despite the noticeable age, his howls and wails seem unapologetic and powerful. And although the style of production can make them sound fuzzy at times, you can definitely tell that Glenn went into this album not caring about any form of hindrance, and that's exactly what makes this album so great. I started this retrospective saying that if this album was released in the 90s, it would be remembered as his best. And while I do still stand by that statement, I do think there is also something special about the man releasing an album like this after so many experimental releases. It captures the disposition and aura, as overused as that word is, of Glenn Danzig, while accomplishing his goal of making the album sound exactly the way he had envisioned it. So maybe 2010 was the perfect time for this album to release. Glenn Danzig has a long and imposing catalog of work that many fans feel are full of hits and misses. Although mainly remembered for what he did in his youth with the Misfits and early 90s hits, Death Red Sabaoth shows that despite his age and controversial career moves, Glenn Danzig's ability to write a powerful and formidable album through DIY approaches and an unwavering mindset show that there is much more soulful depth to the Danzig catalog than a few hits. Many may have disregarded Danzig's Death Red Sabaoth for more contemporary and timely music back in 2010, but for my money, it very well may be some of Glenn Danzig's strongest and most thought-provoking work. And it is definitely one of, if not my favorite album he's ever released. As I am recording this, Glenn and the boys are gearing up for a short West Coast tour this March, and I will be returning to my beloved city of the Angels, if assuming they put the fire out, to see the show at the Kia Forum. And although I will be satisfied with any song Glenn Danzig belts out on stage, I will be a very happy lad if I hear one song off of Death Red Sabaoth. I appreciate everyone giving me their times, and thanks for watching.